Okay, welcome to Module 8. If this is your first time attending with us, thank you for being here. If you've been with us before, welcome back. Today, again, Module 8 of 10. So tomorrow, 9 and 10 will be happening. And today we get to kind of do a deep dive into two more chapters of the textbook. Keep in mind at the end, we'll have some time for a little bit of Q&A. So if you got some questions that you of the presentation. With all that said, I'm just going to jump right into it. Like I said, we have two chapters that we're going over today in Module 8. We have Chapter 14, so foundational information about nutrition. So this is not giving you your PhD in nutrition, but we want to be able to talk about the basics when it comes to nutrition information because your clients are going to ask you questions, 100%. They're going to ask you questions about nutrition, and minimally, you want to be able to speak from a place of some education and be able to speak professionally on the topics of carbs and proteins and fats and calories. And those are the things that we're going to talk about today. And then we'll get into a little bit of information about supplementation as well. The objectives for the nutrition side of what we'll be talking about today. You're going to want to be able to name the 3 macronutrients and their primary function. So that'll be a big one that we get to talk about today. Macronutrients or macros is a topic that gets talked about quite often in the world of health and fitness. So it's good that we're going to be able to take the time to be able to define what those things are and what they do. Number 2, we're going to talk about the general recommendations for those macronutrients. So again, very important. And that is definitely a question that you can hear from some potential clients. We're going to talk about dehydration and hydration, because that's the thing that we want, and explain the general recommendations for water intake. Explain the nutritional importance of minerals, vitamins, and antioxidants. That tripped me up. Normally I say vitamins and minerals, so saying minerals and vitamins felt a little off. Number 5, we're going to talk about the general recommendations for micronutrient intake. So we'll talk about those vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, and how much are appropriate amounts. We'll talk about the recommendations for the dietary guidelines of Americans. We'll talk about food labels and how to read them. We'll talk about portion sizes, and we'll describe some common diets and eating patterns. So that sounds like a lot. It is, but again, it's kind of big picture overview of all of these topics. You can certainly take a deep dive in all of these topics, especially if you take other courses like nutritionist courses, etc. But again, we want to be able, as a personal trainer, to be able to speak intelligently on these topics. All right, next up, macronutrients and micronutrients. So the macronutrients, proteins, carbohydrate, fat, and water. I'll come back to that. And then the micronutrients, vitamins, minerals, and antioxidants. Okay, the macros. So we got protein, carbohydrate, fat, and water. These are kind of the things that are part of a diet that are kind of the bigger parts. And what I mean by bigger, like literally bigger. Like you can see them, you can feel them. These are the things that you're thinking about when you're eating. When you look at that picture, you see some protein, you see some fat, you see some vegetables in there. There's some carbohydrate in there, and again, these are the main things that we think about when we're thinking about our food intake. Water, depending on the text that you're reading, it'll be listed as a macronutrient or not. It's definitely an important part of our diet. It does not happen to deliver, in its purest form, a whole lot of nutritional content or energy like protein, carbohydrates, and fats do. But water is its own thing in that it supplies our body with its most necessary part of our diet, and that is water. We cannot go very long without water. Micronutrients, on the flip side, are going to be kind of the smaller parts of the diet. And again, what I mean by smaller in size, not in importance. Vitamins, minerals, and antioxidants have important roles in the way that our body functions, the way that our organs function, and can certainly play a role in whether or not someone gets the progress that they want out of a fitness program. All right. Let's get into these a little bit more specifically. Let's talk about carbohydrates. So carbohydrates, main source of energy for the human body and the brain. Hopefully I don't need to explain this too much, but we definitely want our brain to be healthy, and we definitely want our brain to have plenty of energy. The brain is going to be the source of not just academic information and thoughts, but the brain is what helps us to move and to experience activities and exercise, etc. So having plenty of energy for the brain, absolutely important for anybody's health and fitness goal. Carbohydrates, they break down into glucose. So carbohydrates, oftentimes when we say carbs, we're thinking about some of the foods that are common. So you can see a picture there. We've got potatoes, we've got these starches, we've got breads, we got some legumes or beans, full of carbohydrates. But carbohydrates in and of itself is not what gives us the energy. It's when we break it down into glucose that now glucose can participate in some of the chemical processes that help us to form energy for activity and for just general life. So carbohydrates, in terms of the three macronutrients that we'll talk about here, the protein, carbohydrate, and fats, it is the best source and the primary source of energy. The other two, protein and fat, can give us energy as well. There's just a lot more hoops to jump through. It's not as efficient, whereas carbohydrates can give us energy quickly and a very usable source of energy for the body and the brain. Carbohydrates also help to protect muscle mass in a way, or protein, from being catabolized during exercise. So like I said, protein can be used as a source of energy as well when needed. And when would we need to use protein as a source of energy? When we're out of carbs, when we're out of glucose, or when we simply do not have enough glucose to facilitate the activity that we're taking on. So we could say that carbohydrates help to protect muscle mass in that we don't have to access the proteins within our muscle mass in order to give us energy. If we have enough energy from the carbohydrates that we're taking in, then we don't have to find energy somewhere else. But what I'm saying is energy is an absolute need of the body. So if you're not taking in the carbohydrate that would help you to have enough energy just for being alive or to facilitate activities, your body's going to have to figure something out because it needs energy. It needs glucose, and it needs it to power the body and the brain. We have two main types of carbohydrate that are typically talked about, and those are going to be simple and complex carbohydrates. So glucose would be a very simple carbohydrate. You can have 1 unit of glucose. Complex carbohydrates, oftentimes you can look at that as a bunch of units of glucose stuck together, or glucose and other forms of sugar stuck together or bonded together in order to make something that is, for lack of a better term, a little bit more complex. So the complexity comes from the fact that there are several sugar units or carbohydrate units bonded together, as opposed to like glucose, where it can be a single sugar unit. So when we talk about things like starches come in the form of plants, so potatoes, they're full of starch, right? And that starch is glucose. Again, a bunch of glucose bonded together in order to form that starch. And again, the simple fact that it's a bunch of sugar units bonded together is what makes it more complex. One other thing about that complexity is, since it's a bunch of units bonded together, it requires work in order to break those bonds, in order to access the glucose, which means in terms of digestion, it just takes a little bit longer to digest it. The typical recommendation for adults as far as carbohydrate intake is 45 to 65% of your total daily calories. So if we were talking about a 2,000 calorie intake, we're talking about 900 to 1,300 of your calories would be coming from carbohydrate. Now that you can look at that as a pretty broad range, and there's reasons for that. Some people, especially depending on their activity level, their exercise level, are going to require more carbohydrate than others. It would make sense that someone who runs marathons for fun would need more energy to facilitate those hours of running, as opposed to someone who is sedentary throughout the day. So, if the question becomes, how do I know 65% versus 45%? Part of it would be dictated by the activity level of the individual. Glycemic index is another measure of the impact that carbohydrates have on your physiology. So glycemic index is a measure of how quickly blood glucose increases after carbohydrate ingestion. So complex carbohydrates generally have a slower release of blood sugar into the bloodstream, whereas high glycemic foods like runners in particular, sometimes they just take glucose packs, and that'll spike your blood sugar very quickly. Now, it's not necessarily the case that one thing is better than the other. Sometimes the context dictates that a blood sugar spike might be a good thing for you. More often than not, though, a lot of people are looking for things to be a little bit more even. So that's where a mix of complex carbohydrate, among other things, would make sense. One thing to note about glycemic index is in your book, you'll see a whole chart about the glycemic index and how it relates to individual foods. So you'll look at almonds versus oranges versus just sugar, and they all have their individual impact. Typically, we eat meals. So if you were to eat a meal with a high glycemic food item, but it's also paired with other things, fats, proteins, etc., then the overall glycemic load of that meal is not going to be as high as that one individual item. So remember, glycemic index is a measure of how a food or a particular food item will increase blood sugar, but there's a glycemic load of an entire meal. Fiber, another point to take home in terms of carbohydrates. Fiber is derived from plant-based foods that the body is unable to break down. So earlier I mentioned starch. And starch is a whole bunch of glucose units bonded together. And when we eat starch, we're able to break it down, break apart those bonds, and access the glucose. Fiber is also a bunch of glucose units bonded together, but the way that it's bonded together is it's put together in such a way that we do not have the capacity to digest it and break it apart and get the glucose. But fiber does play other roles, including just adding kind of some bulk to the food that we're taking in to help keep our digestive system strong. One last note on carbohydrates before we move on. There are 4 calories for every gram of carbohydrate that you intake. So again, if you were going to take in 100 grams of carbohydrate, that would give you approximately 400 calories. So again, a good note to take for quiz and test taking purposes for sure. But this is also a nice thing to know because in conversations with clientele, sometimes you're trying to figure out calorie intake, where are calories coming from? Are they eating too much? Are they not eating enough? And some of this basic information helps to facilitate conversations like that. All right, next up, let's talk about fats. So fat gets kind of a bad rap because unfortunately, fat in our foods, it's the same word that we use when we're describing fat on our body. And sometimes for a lot of people, they're trying to lose body fat. Fat in and of itself is an essential nutrient, absolutely essential for a lot of the basic functions of the body. Fats are also known as lipids. So typically in our world, we're going to use those terms interchangeably. Fats are also known as lipids. Fat is a very energy-dense nutrient. Fat stores a lot of energy. Fat protects vital organs. It provides insulation. Fat helps to transport fat-soluble vitamins, and we'll talk about those vitamins here in a little bit. Fat also plays a role in tissue growth and hormone production and helps the body use vitamins. Lastly, it also helps to keep the skin healthy. So again, a lot of things that I think a lot of people would find important, right? I think a lot of people would say tissue growth, hormone production, keeping the skin healthy are important things that we would want to get out of our diet. And fat is going to be a main contributor to those things. Fatty acids are the smaller absorbable building blocks of fat. So earlier, when we talked about carbohydrates, we take in the carbohydrates, and like I said, we break it down into glucose. So that would be kind of the smallest part. Well, in this case, the fats are going to be broken down into fatty acids, and those fatty acids then go and do the myriad of different jobs that they have in our body. Triglycerides are the most common form of fat in the body, also known as body fat. Triglycerides are what we typically refer to when we talk about fat. So when we're thinking about like a lot of the fat that we see in some of the foods that we're taking in, oftentimes that's triglycerides. Fats can also be saturated or unsaturated, and the unsaturated fats also get broken down into monounsaturated or polyunsaturated fats. And when we say saturated, what we're talking about is saturated with hydrogen. So within each bond in those fatty acids, there's going to be hydrogen associated with it. So if it is saturated, that means every bond has hydrogen associated with it. When they're unsaturated, some of it may be, there's some of the fatty acids may be lacking hydrogen, or maybe several of those bonds will be lacking the hydrogen. This is where we get kind of the term hydrogenation. Sometimes in production of food, we'll take an unsaturated fat, and again, it's unsaturated in terms of hydrogen, and then we hydrogenate it to give it a lot of the properties that a saturated fat would have. There are essential fatty acids, and essential fatty acids that cannot be synthesized by the body. So what that means is they're essential for us to go out and get them in our diet. The typical recommendation for fat intake is 30 to 35% of your daily calorie intake. So again, still a pretty significant amount of your diet in the form of fat. And just keep in mind this, when we think of fat and fat in our diet, it's going to come from a lot of different places. Pictured there, you see some seeds, you see some nuts, but then you also see some fish and some avocado. Very, very different sources of food, different sources of nutrients, but all of them deliver some form of fat to our diet. Calories per gram. So we mentioned earlier carbohydrates, 4 calories per gram. In this case, fat, 9 calories per gram. So much more dense in energy, as I said earlier, and therefore giving us more calories. Next up, we got protein. Protein, just like fats and just like carbohydrates, have plenty of important jobs that they have to take on as a part of just keeping us healthy. And then for building all those muscles that we like to talk about, protein is oftentimes in our world associated with muscle building, but it does a lot more than that. It's needed for building and maintaining body tissues. So not just muscle. We've got a lot of other tissues going on in our body, including our organs, that need to be repaired and rebuilt. So protein is going to play a major role in that. The smallest part, or the part that proteins break down to, are called amino acids. And these, again, are the building blocks of protein. So the building blocks, I guess, of carbohydrates would be glucose. The building blocks of fats would be fatty acids. And now with protein, we're talking about amino acids as the building block of protein. The body requires 20 different amino acids, 9 of which are essential. So again, what that means is if it's essential that we obtain it from our diet. So we got to find those amino acids in our diet in order to complete the amino acid profile, get all those 20 different amino acids so that those amino acids can then go into our body and build all the different structures that we need in order to be healthy. A complete protein is a food source that has all 9 essential amino acids. Oftentimes, animal sources of protein are going to be complete proteins. So therefore, when you're eating animal sources of protein, so like fish, like beef, etc., you're going to be getting all those amino acids and therefore having a complete amino acid profile. An incomplete protein would be a food source that lacks 1 or more of the 9 essential amino acids. So now you have an incomplete amino acid profile in your diet, at least for that particular food. Now, it's very common in the vegan or vegetarian world to pair foods together in order to complete the amino acid profile of the meal. So a very common one is beans and rice. When you eat beans and rice together, individually, they are incomplete proteins. But when you have them as a meal, you have now created a meal that completes that amino acid profile, has all 9 of those essential amino acids, and now gives you more of what you need out of your protein intake, and something to really take note of when you or any of your clients are vegetarian or vegan. This will be a topic of conversation. A general recommendation is 0.66 to 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight per day. If you're not sure how much you weigh in kilograms, you're going to take your weight in pounds and divide it by 2.2, and then that will give you your weight in kilograms. So then you would go 0.66 or 0.8 times your weight in kilograms, and that would give you a general recommendation. Please do note this. This is a general recommendation and kind of a minimum recommendation for just kind of functioning and being alive. If you are out there being very active throughout the day, if you are exercising, lifting weights and breaking down your body, very, very consistently, then your protein intake is probably going to be higher. So again, this is another situation where the context matters. You might remember earlier, I talked about carbohydrate intake. The marathon runner is probably going to need a higher intake of carbohydrate than the person who is sedentary. Well, in this case, the person who is breaking down their body and exercising and is very active on a very regular basis, their need for protein may increase. And again, just like it says here, recommendations vary based on physical activity, sex, age, weight, and health status. Calories per gram equals 4. So carbohydrates and protein each give us 4 calories per gram, where fat gives us 9 calories per gram. All right, moving on. So we're going to talk about water, and that'll kind of wrap up the macronutrient portion of this lecture. So water makes up about 60% of total body weight in adults and 75% of total body weight in children. This is a way of saying that it is important. It is literally the majority of your weight. Now, it's not just, it's not like you got just a bunch of glasses of water floating around inside you. When we intake that water then gets converted into a lot of the fluids necessary for us to function. Our blood will not flow if there's no water in our body, because most of blood is water. A lot of the fluids that help to lubricate our joints and help them to move freely is made of water. So water, again, very important. Not to mention the fact that it is a critical part of all of the chemical processes that happen in our body that give us energy, allow our heart to beat, allow for a lot of the functions of our organs to take place. So again, critical to life and essential for many body functions. It acts as a solvent, catalyst, lubricant, temperature regulator, mineral source, and regulator of growth. So again, a lot of things going on there. A lot of people, I've run into this quite a bit with clientele over the years. A lot of people don't do a good job with their water intake, and it is a simple thing that you can do in order to feel better, perform better, and again, get a lot of the basics of just general health in order so that you can put your focus on the fitness goals that you may have. Dehydration equals a harmful loss or removal of water in the body. So it doesn't take much in order for someone to feel the effects of being dehydrated. If you lose about 2% of your body weight in water, you're already going to have diminished function in terms of performance. So if you're playing sports or working out, certainly you're going to have diminished performance there. You may have diminished performance in terms of how sharp you feel, how mentally sharp you feel. And again, once you get to 2% of your body weight, it's already happening. So if you have someone who's 200 pounds, 2% of their body weight would be about 4 pounds. And I know for me, when I've done hot, sweaty workouts or play a bunch of basketball or whatever the case may be, I know I've had times where I've lost 6, 7, 8 pounds just in a couple of hours of sweating. One thing to take note of when you do that, let's just say you lose 6 pounds playing basketball for a couple of hours. That doesn't mean you've lost body fat. That means you've lost water. Along with it, you've probably lost quite a bit of electrolytes or the salts that are associated with that sweat. You want to replace that water. So if you lost 6 pounds of water during a workout, you want to replace that water. You want to drink 6 pounds of water. That's your best bet to get your function of your body where it needs to be. So oftentimes, you may need to replace that amount, the amount of weight that you've lost, times 1.5. So if you've lost 6 pounds of water during a workout, you may want to drink 9 pounds of water in order to make sure that not only are you replacing what was lost, but putting in a little extra in order to kind of facilitate the extra work that your body had just put in, and be able to recover from that extra work that you just put in. General recommendations for adults: 91 and 125 fluid ounces, or 91 to 125 fluid ounces, or 2.7 to 3.7 liters of water per day. So it makes sense. If you're not sure how much water you take in, try to give it a shot and measure. And there's a lot of great water bottles out there that tell you exactly how much you're taking in. I know mine, I've got mine right here. It holds about 40 ounces of water. So I drink about 3 of those a day. I know I'm getting my 120 ounces of water. So again, very important. And the talk about carbohydrates, fats, proteins, and water are easy conversations to have with our clients. And oftentimes you'll be doing them a favor because you'll be teaching them quite a bit that they don't know about nutrition. All right, let's talk about micronutrients. So we covered the big ones. And when I say big, I mean literally big. Now we're going to talk about these smaller parts of our nutrition, the micronutrients. We're going to start with minerals. Minerals are needed for several body functions. Minerals do not provide calories. So that's a good note to take away. They do not provide calories, whereas protein, carbohydrate, and fat, they definitely do give us calories. Some minerals are required in large quantities. So those would be the macro minerals or the bigger ones. And while others are only required in trace amounts. So the trace minerals. When we look at the macros, we got calcium, chloride, magnesium, phosphate, potassium, sodium. So some of those are pretty common terms. You've probably heard them before. And these are literally rocks, just not big rocks. They're very tiny rocks that are associated with the food that you intake or maybe the vitamins that you take. And they play major roles in our body's ability to do things like contract muscles. If we did not have enough calcium in our body, our heart wouldn't beat. So again, very important. Usually we think of calcium as it helps to build strong bones, and that comes from great marketing from the from dairy. But calcium also plays other roles. Magnesium. Magnesium is a precursor to melatonin. So we produce melatonin naturally if the magnesium is there in the first place. So it plays a role in oftentimes in us being able to get a good night's sleep. The trace minerals, again, we find them in smaller amounts, but again, very important in terms of function. You've probably heard of some of the issues that people may have if they're iron deficient. Energy production is going to be a little bit more difficult in that case. So again, all of these are very important. You can find a lot of these micronutrients, these minerals, in a lot of what we might call some of the healthier foods like vegetables, for instance. Next up, we've got our vitamins. So we just covered the minerals. Now we've got the vitamins. Vitamins, essential for so many physiological processes. And we got the two main categories. We've got fat soluble and we've got water soluble. So earlier, when I was talking about fat, we talked about one of their functions being the delivery of fat soluble vitamins. Well, here they are, definitely for quiz and test taking purposes. This is a good note to take. The fat soluble vitamins are A, D, E, and K. The water soluble vitamins are the B vitamins, all of which have their own more complex name, and then vitamin C. Now, here's a couple of things about fat soluble vitamins. They get delivered to us via fat in our diet, and they're also absorbed along with fat in the diet. They can be stored in the fatty tissues of the body. And again, because of that, because they're stored in the fatty tissues, they can stick with us a little bit longer, and we can have some kind of stored for whatever functions they're going to be helping us with. Water-soluble vitamins are broken down and absorbed with water. So they're not really stored within the tissues of the body. They're in the watery parts of our body. So we have to replace those B vitamins and vitamin C. I guess more often they have to be a more common part of our diet, because since they're water soluble, they get ingested easily, but they also leave us easily through sweat, through urination, etc. So they don't stay with us quite as easily as those fat soluble vitamins. So again, the main takeaway here: vitamins, essential for so many physiological processes. In your textbook, it goes into a little bit more detail as far as all of the things each individual vitamin can do for you and what happens when you are deficient in those vitamins. But the fat-soluble vitamins, A, D, E, and K, water-soluble, the B vitamins, and vitamin C. All right, let's talk about antioxidants. So another micronutrient, antioxidants. First, let's start with this. Free radicals can damage cells. So free radicals can be floating around in our body. They come about for numerous reasons. Smoking can be a reason why we would potentially have greater amounts of free radicals floating around. Free radicals can damage cells. They can damage protein. They can damage DNA and contribute to chronic disease. Antioxidants work to prevent or delay damage caused by free radicals. So that is a major role that they play there, is basically preservation of our cells, of our protein, of our DNA, and helping to keep us healthy and hopefully keep away chronic disease. Some of the following substances, like it says here, are known for their antioxidant properties. You're going to see a couple of vitamins in there. You see vitamin C and vitamin E. So some of the vitamins that we take in can certainly contribute to this. But then you see a few others as well, like beta carotene, CoQ10, phytoestrogens, polyphenols. So many of these you can get in a lot of vegetables, as a matter of fact. But just know that in terms of having an overall healthy diet, having antioxidants as a part of our diet helps with very important things like keeping the cells, protein, and DNA intact and healthy. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about dietary guidelines for Americans. So these are guidelines for healthy, lifelong eating habits for Americans 2 years of age or older. This is something you can look up, and it's part of the text as well, but it's something you can look up on your own. They've got their own website, and it is an interesting thing to see what these dietary guidelines spell out for us and what those guidelines are. We're going to talk today about some of those concepts. So some of those concepts about dietary guidelines on the next slide, please. We've got 5 of them for you. So concept number 1: follow a healthy eating pattern across the lifespan. That's an important note to take away. That seems like no kidding when you read it, but a lot of people don't eat this way. A lot of people will go on a diet and eat healthy for a little while and then go off the diet. And it would really make much more sense, it makes more logical sense anyway, that eating healthy for your entire lifetime would promote greater health. Now, the fact is, a lot of people don't do it. And sometimes it's because they don't know how to, they don't have the education, they don't have the motivation, etc. There are a lot of reasons why. And most of them don't have anything to do with logic. A lot of the reasons why people choose to eat something is not based on logic. They're choosing it because it sounds like a good idea and it sounds delicious. And that's a whole other topic. But following a healthy eating pattern across a lifespan, very important. Concept number 2, focusing on a variety of nutrient-dense foods and food amounts. So variety and nutrient density, that is a big one. If you're eating the same 2 things all the time, I guess that makes things easy in terms of food preparation, but you're limiting yourself in terms of getting the vast array of nutrients, vitamins and minerals and antioxidants that are necessary for healthy living. So trying to figure out which foods are nutrient dense can be a big deal. And by nutrient density, we're talking about how much bang for your buck does a food bring to the table? Does it bring a lot of nutrients per calorie or per unit of weight? So I'll just give you a couple of examples. Liver happens to be a very nutrient dense food. Not my favorite, but it does happen to be a very nutrient dense food. And dark leafy greens happen to be very nutrient dense, meaning they're not giving you tons of calories, but it's giving you tons of nutrients. We're on the other side, I don't know, we can look at like a Pop-Tart or something like that. Pretty calorie dense per weight, and not giving you a variety of vitamins and minerals, unfortunately. So again, focus on variety, nutrient density, and the amount of food that you're taking in. Concept number 3, limit calories from added sugars, saturated fats, and reducing sodium intake. The standard American diet is usually very high in added sugars, very high in saturated fats, and very high in sodium. And for some good reasons. If you're a food manufacturer and you're trying to make foods very palatable, and sometimes they use the term hyper palatable, meaning really delicious, then adding sugars, adding fats, adding sodium is just what it takes in order to make a food a little bit more addicting. And when I say addicting, I'm using that just to kind of describe it. It's not actually truly addicting, but when something tastes really good, it makes you want to go back for more. Concept number 4, shifting to healthier food and beverage choices. Absolutely. And that's kind of the whole thing that we're talking about today, is understanding which foods are probably healthier choices and then choosing those foods more often. Same thing with beverages. Very common beverages are sodas, juices full of sugar, alcohol. Alcohol is a toxin, so it definitely is not delivering any nutritional value. But then juices that are just full of sugar, where they're just giving you calories and sugar and nothing else, it's a tough choice. Same thing with sodas. Oftentimes they're delivering a lot of sugar, calories, but not a lot of nutritional value. And then lastly, supporting healthy eating patterns for all. So this concept, what we're really kind of getting at there is, kind of a community-based thought or community-based approach, in that we want these healthy eating patterns for everyone. It's always easier to kind of start with yourself and your family, but promoting this can make life a little bit easier. If you hang out with a lot of people that eat in a healthy way, then it's kind of easier to hang out and eat together because you're not having to kind of get around those food choices. I know that in my years as a personal trainer, one of the difficulties for a lot of my clients was the weekends were social events where they knew there was going to be a bunch of delicious foods, not so healthy foods, and foods that didn't really kind of fit the goal that they were trying to achieve. It was a really difficult thing to overcome because you don't want to miss out on social events and family events or community events, but you also don't want to necessarily derail the progress that you've been making. So when we have healthy eating as a culture, then it becomes so much easier. All right, let's talk about reading nutrition labels. So a few things about nutrition labels. First, I'll start with this. When food comes in packaging, the front of the package kind of displays marketing, right? They're trying to get your attention. They want you to buy the food. So, sometimes you walk down an aisle and maybe on the front of a package, it's like, pictures of nature and rivers and happy people. And those sorts of pictures make you think, okay, this is a healthy choice, but maybe not. And that's where reading the food label comes into play, because the front of the package is trying to get your attention and market to you. The back of the label, the nutrition facts label, this is absolute. This is what's going on in this food. And this is where you get the real information on whether or not it's a good food choice for you. So the nutrition facts label, required by the FDA on most food and beverages, that details the food's nutrient content. So for quiz and test taking purposes, a good vocabulary term to take away. We have the ingredients list as a part of these food labels. So what you'll see kind of toward the bottom of some of these food labels, you'll see the actual ingredients. It is a list provided on the food label of each ingredient in the product in descending order of prominence. It's a fancy way of saying the one that comes first is the one that there's the most of. So if you were to buy a package of wheat bread, you would hope that the first ingredient is wheat. If not, I might have some questions about this bread. But again, the thing that comes in first is the thing that there is the most of, and then second is the second the most, third is the third most, etc. The daily value, or DVs, are reference amounts expressing grams, milligrams, or micrograms of nutrients to consume or not to exceed each day. So under the part where you see the calories, so if you're looking at a couple of these food labels, you'll see the part where it lists the calories. Underneath that, you start to see new recommendations or how much per serving there is in terms of fats, cholesterol, sodiums, and carbohydrates. And then under that, you start to see these reference amounts for the different vitamins, different minerals, etc. So again, this is where you're going to get a lot of information in terms of how much of these different nutrients are in the food, but then also how much there is in relation to how much you should be taking in on a daily basis. So very important thing to understand, this food label. And this is a great conversation to have with your clients. You will have plenty of clients who have never read food labels or who have never really looked at them fully. Sometimes you'll have people that just look for how much fat's in this or how much protein is in this, but that doesn't tell the whole picture. You're going to want to be able to teach yourself and teach your clients how to read the full label. Next up, let's talk about portion sizes. Now, sometimes in the world of coaching a client, you need to be able to give them tools that they will actually do. So giving them a book about nutrition and giving them all this fancy information is great, but just because, it's logical to know more about nutrition doesn't mean people are going to do it. Sometimes giving them tools that they can easily fit into their life, a tool that is not scary, doesn't cause anxiety, etc. Much like, for some people, counting calories can cause anxiety. Just the thought of having to measure food with a food scale can send people into kind of a tailspin where it all of a sudden becomes overwhelming. Sometimes saying, hey, you know what? 2 palms, so a protein portion the size of both your palms is the right amount for each meal. Sometimes that is a good place to start. Is it scientifically sound for every single person? Of course not. But is it pretty close? And is it a good tool to get someone to start doing something? Yes, it definitely can be. It's not to say that this tool is for everyone, but it's a good place to start for a lot of people. So these hand-sized portions are for males, 2 palm portions of protein, dense foods with each meal. 2/5 of vegetables, 2-cup handfuls of carbs, 2 entire thumbs of fat-dense foods. This is kind of a way to see if you are doing the right things in terms of portion sizes for each particular meal in order to keep your calorie intake under control, and also to make sure that you're getting a variety of nutrients. When you're getting protein, carbohydrate, and fat in each meal, you can start to claim that the way that you're eating is balanced and you're getting something from all of the essential nutrients. So again, I get it that some people are going to have different sized hands. All of that, you're correct if you're thinking those things. But in terms of giving someone a tool that they can start with, this can be a good tool. And if they see success, potentially they'll move on to, I guess, more advanced things. Next up, for females, you're really just going to cut that number in half. And again, not very scientific, but it is generally true that males are larger than females and will have greater needs in terms of calories and nutrients. So again, this can vary from one person to the next, but a very handy tool to be able to give to your clients. Let's talk a little bit about diet trends, and then we'll move on to talking about supplements. So some basic diet trends that are out there, you guys have seen this: detox diets, carnivore diet, the DASH diet, which is commonly used for people with high blood pressure, the Mediterranean diet, which is very commonly known as a very healthy diet, intermittent fasting, plant-based diets, keto, Atkins, etc. These are all trends in dieting. Some of them can be useful in order to get people to make some change to the way that they're eating. Just keep in mind that one of those concepts we talked about earlier was getting someone to live a lifestyle where they're eating healthy as a part of their entire life. So these trends oftentimes do not feed into that. They oftentimes, they're not only a diet trend, they end up just being kind of a trend in your life for a while until you get bored of it or don't want to do it anymore. And that is kind of the key question: is when people start eating in a different way, is it sustainable? If not, then it's not going to be the best choice for a lot of our clientele. All right, moving on. We got supplementation, and this is another one where we don't have to be worldwide experts in supplements, but it definitely makes sense to be able to speak on it a little bit because clients are going to ask. Some of the learning objectives for this section, what we want to be able to understand coming away from this is the importance of vitamins and minerals and supplements. We already talked about the importance of vitamins and minerals in our diet, so a lot of that importance is going to carry over to supplementation. We want to identify supplements that enhance exercise performance and recovery. So we'll do a little bit of that, and we'll define the benefits of incorporating ergogenic aids and botanicals into a person's nutrition plan. All right, dietary supplements. Let's define what these things are in the first place. So dietary supplements, they are a product containing one or more dietary ingredients that is intended to supplement a person's nutrition plan. So please do take note of the fact that we're saying supplement a person's nutrition plan. It is not to take the place of a person's nutrition plan. It is there to supplement it. Oftentimes, the way you can look at like taking vitamins, for instance, is that you're trying to kind of plug some holes that are not filled by the food that you're taking in for whatever reason. I know I've taken a test where I was deficient in vitamin D, so I actually supplement with vitamin D because, again, I found through blood testing that I was deficient in that area, and it kind of surprised me because I'm outside a lot, etc. But the test was very objective, gave me that information, so therefore I supplement with vitamin D. Some nutrient requirements and deficiencies as we move on here. Just a couple of pieces of terminology. We got dietary reference intakes and we got the recommended daily allowance. So the DRI is a set of standards estimating how much of a nutrient should be ingested that is used in planning eating patterns for healthy individuals. So again, quiz and test taking purposes, a good couple of notes to take away. And then the RDA, or the recommended daily allowance, the average daily level of intake that is sufficient to meet the needs of nearly all healthy people. So that is a good way to put it, because some people are, we're all a little bit different, right? Some people are going to have greater needs than others. I know for me, I actually need to take in more of the RDA for vitamin D in order to meet the needs of my lifestyle and my body. And then lastly, the 2020 to 2025 dietary guidelines for Americans. So this is the same thing that we mentioned earlier. States that the general population in the U.S. fails to meet the recommendations for food groups and nutrient intakes. And then a couple of things to take away here. Iron deficiency is one of the most common nutrient deficiencies. Multivitamins and minerals are one of the most common dietary supplements. A lot of people find that they are deficient in vitamins and minerals in their diet in some way. And there's a lot of great services now that are out there, like the one that I did, that can tell you where you're deficient. But multivitamins, they're usually a broad spectrum of vitamins and minerals and antioxidants to try to, again, deliver or plug up the holes that your current diet is not filling for you. Next up, some reasons for an individual to consider a dietary supplement. So individuals restricting calories by consuming less than 1,200 calories a day. That is a very low calorie diet. There are instances where these can be recommended. There are medically supervised weight loss programs where below 1,200 is a common number. And it's not a great lifestyle to lead, but sometimes people are in a place where they need to make a drastic change to their body and their weight in order to make sure that they can continue to live. So therefore, in some of those cases, it's important that the weight loss happen and happen quickly. Because they're not taking enough calories and not enough food, they're not getting the nutrients they need. So vitamins and minerals would be necessary to supplement. Individuals with food allergies or intolerances. Some people are allergic, I don't know if you know people like this, but some people are allergic or intolerant to like everything, right? And if they're allergic to a lot of different foods out there, it might mean that those foods as sources of nutrients don't work for them, but they still need nutrients. And that's where supplements can come into play. Aging often requires more of certain nutrients, and that can certainly be the case. You can see it's very common for vitamin D supplementation or calcium supplementation, usually both, to be recommended for those who are aging or those who have bone density issues. People who spend little or no time outside in the sun. I guess that's me. I do spend plenty of time out in the sun, but I need to supplement with vitamin D. Preconception or pregnancy. Sometimes increasing nutrient intake helps to make for a healthy pregnancy. If someone has poor eating patterns, if you're eating fast food, processed food all the time, you're not getting all the nutrients that you need. And then certain medications are going to get in the way of absorption of some vitamins and minerals, and therefore supplementation of those vitamins and minerals may be necessary. A few performance enhancement supplements to talk about. So some people do supplement in order to be able to perform better, to perform more, to be stronger, etc. It's not all just about getting your nutrients for health. So you can see we've got a basic list here, and in your text it goes a little bit more in depth with all of these things. But when you take supplements, some of the things or some of the ways in which they can increase performance are listed here. So if you could do something like dilate blood vessels in the exercising muscles, this can help to promote greater blood flow to those areas, which means more delivery of nutrients, more delivery of oxygen, which is necessary when someone is exercising hard. So you can see the one I'm talking about is nitrate or beetroot extract. That acts as a vasodilator. So the same thing. There are supplements out there that are NO supplements, and those do the same thing where it kind of dilates blood vessels, allows for greater blood flow, allows for more nutrients and oxygen to be delivered, and therefore greater performance. Moving on, just a few more potential performance enhancers. We've got caffeine. Caffeine can just act as a stimulant for you. And I know for me, sometimes caffeine helps to just bring about a certain amount of mental focus as I go into work or go into a workout. You'll see creatine kind of in the middle there. Creatine is the most widely studied performance enhancement supplement out there. It is safe, but you want to know what you're using it for. It does help the muscles to generate energy for short-term anaerobic activity. So the other day, you probably heard about the energy systems a little bit and how there's aerobic and anaerobic energy systems. Creatine would be more helpful with those anaerobic energy systems or short bursts of high intensity, as opposed to marathon running, for instance. Ergogenic aids are up next. And an ergogenic aid is a nutritional, pharmacological, or psychological aid that enhances exercise capacity. So creatine would be one of those as well. It allows you to potentially do more work. Something like beta-alanine can help with delaying fatigue. And again, in terms of trying to get more out of your workouts, if you can delay fatigue, that can certainly be something that can be very useful. You see stimulants on there. Caffeine would act as one of those things. A lot of people love their pre-workout and their energy drinks. And then certainly banned substances. So steroids absolutely would be performance enhancers. Botanical supplements. So not something that I commonly spoke on when speaking to clients, but it is something that comes up. For quiz and test taking purposes, we need to know what these things are. So a botanical is a plant or a plant part containing various medicinal properties. They come in many forms, including fresh and dried plants, plant parts, and extracts. Just know this, supplements are not regulated by the FDA. So you can actually, just put together some plant parts, bottle it up, market it, sell it for its proposed medicinal properties. Not to say that that's what happens all the time, but that can happen. So with these sorts of supplements, you want to do your research and understand them well. There is a little bit more information in the text about this, but just know that these are not drugs. They're listed as dietary supplements, and they're not all well proven to do what they say they do. So just know that going in. A few examples of botanical supplements, and we'll close this thing out. So you can see CBD. That would probably be the one that's the most out there nowadays in terms of a lot of its medicinal properties. Like I said, it's been shown to reduce anxiety, improve sleep, and increase weight loss. And some people have definitely reported these benefits as well. But the cool part about, I think, this slide is that it also talks about some of the research that's done and some of the research that's ongoing. One thing about science is slow. So just know that just because something hasn't been proven doesn't mean it's wrong, just means maybe it hasn't been proven yet. And then next up on our last slide here, just a few more examples of some common botanical supplements. Milk thistle would be one of those ones that people may be aware of. It's known to promote cell repair for liver health and detoxification. Again, there's not a lot of research to support this claim, but again, that doesn't mean that's necessarily wrong, just means the research isn't there yet. Okay, we did it. So that's a ton of information we just went over. We covered nutrition. The main takeaways I would want you to have would be, what are the macronutrients and what are the micronutrients? And then they're different categories. For instance, vitamins, we got fat soluble and water soluble. And then as we get into supplementation, you kind of want to know the difference. We got nutrient supplements, we got ergogenic aids, but then also just be able to speak on why someone might take supplements. In some cases, oftentimes they're just trying to fill in a blank that their food intake is not covering for them. All right, we got a few minutes here. If there's any questions, now is the time. If no questions today, that's okay too. You can bring in the next time. But any questions on all of this information? I know it was a lot. And of course, if you need clarification on the information, we ran through this very quickly. That's why you have the textbook and all those videos as a part of this course. When you pair all of these things together, hopefully that all can help you out. It looks like we're going to have a question about protein. And very good question, Alan. No, it's all supplements. All supplements are not regulated by the FDA. Some supplements are processed and put together in FDA regulated laboratories. So that's part of their selling point, and sometimes part of the reason why some supplements are more expensive. There's a brand out there called Thorne, Thorne, very expensive brand, but a very well respected brand in that they do a lot of work to adhere to a lot of the FDA standards if they were regulated by the FDA. So Aaron says, Google says pea protein is a complete protein, but one of the quizzes asks which isn't a complete protein, and that isn't the only one that isn't animal. So I don't know. So Aaron, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take note of this, because this may be a question about a quiz question, and if it's presented correctly. Now, one thing, just to clarify something, when I mentioned animal sources of protein as sources of complete proteins, that was not to say that those are the only sources of complete proteins in the food world. They're just the most common ones. There are kind of plant-based sources like algae. You can find complete protein in. The question starts to become how bioavailable is the protein, and therefore the amino acids that you're getting. We're starting to get into the weeds here a little bit, but those would be the things that you want to clarify as you get into kind of picking out the different sources of protein that you might want to take in. So I'm taking note of this just to make sure that our questions are set. And let me just reread it again. Google says pre-protein is a complete protein, but one of the quizzes asks which isn't a complete protein. And that, oh, okay, gotcha. So again, we could take a look at that question, but just know, just to clarify, when I said animal sources of protein are complete proteins, again, that doesn't mean that it's only animal sources. It's just, those are just the ones that are the dominant complete proteins in the world of food. Very good question. And any other questions before we log out here? We got a couple minutes. If not, feel free to move on with your day and have a great time with your studies. And as far as the final exam, nutrition is not a major part of the final exam of this course, because this is just a broad overview and just kind of touching on some of the concepts that you would need to know to get out there and start working with clients so that you can have these conversations. If you are trying to know more, you can certainly go in depth. There are full courses that are just on nutrition, so you can become a little bit more of a specialist there. Alan has a question on food labels. Do they use an average middle-aged male for the percentage? Yes, I don't have those stats in front of me, but it is, yeah, it's kind of an average size person as well. And it's based on 2,000 calories of intake typically. And I know for me in particular, my average food intake on a daily basis is closer to 3,000 or 3,500 calories. So some of those numbers would have to adjust up a little bit. Not necessarily the percentage, but the amounts of those nutrients that I was taking in. But Alan, yeah, I don't have an exact answer for that one, but it is based, the main takeaway is that it is based on a 2,000 calorie diet. So then if your intake is more or less than that, you would have to kind of adjust the intake of certain nutrients up or down accordingly. Good question. All right, we got time for maybe another question or two before we sign out here. Anything else from you guys? Thank you for the questions, by the way. I'm always glad to get some questions at the end of these. Well, all right, like I said, I think that nutrition makes up maybe 5 to 10% of the final exam. So don't stress out if that felt like a lot of information. It is. There's other parts of the test that are, or there's other parts of this text that are going to be greater parts of the final exam, including the biological sciences, the anatomy, the physiology, the program design, and exercise selection. Those are more major parts of the exam. But again, if you feel compelled to learn a lot more about nutrition, there are whole courses all about it, including nutritionists from ISSA. So thank you guys. Look forward to tomorrow. So module 9 and 10 will be happening tomorrow with a couple of other instructors. And keep up the good work. I like to see these questions. So thank you, everybody. Good luck with everything. We'll see you next time.